that they want government to address or to make proposals from as many stakeholders. Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, each of your tables, there's thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out here at Natambua. As was mentioned by the Permanent Secretary, the reason why we had it in the Western Division is because a couple of reasons. Symbolic, I suppose, the fact that we had the cyclone here just recently, and we need to show the people in the Western Division that they're just as important as the people in the Eastern side. Many people would argue that the bulk of the Fijian economy comes from the Western Division. We need to also have cognizance of that. But the other reason also is to be able to ensure that the government thinking, the services is also decentralized, and people need to feel part of the overall Fijian economy. I'd like to also just, before I sort of make a few comments, and I don't have a written speech as such, but I was making some notes and I have some general observations I'd like to make in respect of the budget, upcoming budget, and also if I can provide some food for thought in respect of your deliberations this morning, also into this afternoon, because we'd like some constructive input from you. There are a number of challenges we have, and indeed a number of opportunities at the same time that we need to be able to explore and exploit. But I think it is very important for us to also acknowledge, for the first time in Fiji's history, we actually have a Permanent Secretary of Finance who's a female. Please put your hands together for her. And I think also, you know, for the first time in Fiji's history, you actually have 4 females who are Permanent Secretaries at the same time. We have a Speaker who's a Permanent Secretary, you have the Secretary General to Parliament who's a female, and you also have the Secretary to Cabinet, who many people also tend to neglect, who's also a female, all of them at the same time. And I think it is very critical. The reason why I raised this is I mentioned to a group of police officers yesterday at the closing ceremony giving out the certificate, whether it's gender, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's religiosity, whatever the case may be, or even provincialism, all of that needs to be foregone because we need to appoint people on merit. We need to choose the best person for the right job. Because purely for those of you who are interested in economics only and commercial sense, that if you choose the right person for your organization, for the civil service, for your parent-teacher association, for your company, you will get the best result for that organization. And that, from a commercial perspective, makes a lot of sense. So it is very critical that we all start thinking along those lines. And this is what government is doing and leading from the front. And what you see today, the reforms that are taking place in the civil service, is a manifestation of that way of thinking, of that philosophy. Ladies and gentlemen, the Deputy Governor obviously highlighted a number of key factors, as Father Kevin Barr mentioned. Maybe he went too fast and some of the things are perhaps a bit too, detailed in terms of understanding the concepts. But the reality is that whilst the economy is going, we cannot sit back on our laurels and say, well, this is great now, let's all sit back. Because there's still a number of issues. There are a number of legal issues, there are a number of social issues, there are a number of economic issues, and indeed bureaucratic issues that we need to either solve or we need to improve upon to be able to position ourselves in the 21st century. And the reality is there's a lot of untapped potential in Fiji. The reality is also that as a small, vulnerable economy, and the reason we say vulnerable is because our economic base is not as wide as other countries. I'll give you a very simple point. Christchurch is a massive earthquake, almost devastated the entire city. But the New Zealand economy still functions. The New Zealand economy still grows, maybe not to as much as we are growing, but it still grows. The economic base does not get affected. If the cyclone Winston had continued on the trajectory that he was on, coming from the northeast, if it went through Suva, went through the middle of Viti Levu, you could have kissed goodbye to Nandi, the Coral Coast, and the Mamanudas. And indeed, it would have affected both the northern and southern coast of Viti Levu. We probably would not be here having this discussion. Because as was highlighted, 35% of our GDP depends on tourism. So the reality is that you can have one single climatic event that could set you back for decades. That's why we say that we are vulnerable. Because you can have one event that can devastate your economy. We need to get out of that space. That is our challenge. In order for us to be able to get out of that space, we need to have a broader based economy. A number of other contributors contributing to our economy. And that is our challenge. What do? We have a population of less than 1 million people. We have had a huge brain drain in Fiji. We now have obviously policies that are trying to entice the younger people to stay in Fiji, trying to educate people. We have free education. We have TELS. Why are all of these things being done? They are being done because we are investing in the future. We need to have more engineers and architects. We need to have more doctors and nurses. We need more marine scientists. We need more IT people. We need more forest managers. These are the areas that we need to improve upon, because as you can see, any country in the world that has done well, whether it's USA, whether it's Singapore, whichever country it is, they have always invested in those areas, and it is the human capital that is very critical. Because investing in your human capital also means that you get the intellectual power to be able to help you solve problems a lot better. We have had decades, ladies and gentlemen, of where it has been free for all. In particular, and we've said this before, the 87 events set in train a number of issues that we are still dealing with till today. Even if you look at the 4-laning that's taking place between Nandi Airport and up to the roundabout going off to Wailoaloa, there's a section in front of the development where the Esco Motors is. The entire drainage system is up the creek. Do you excuse the pun? It's up the creek. You've allowed developments to take place in the 1980s and 90s, land subdivision. You have pipes about this small going through areas where there should have been huge culverts. We are dealing with it today. So the cost of engineering that road is far more expensive. You have Raki town that floods all the time. Half the time is the problem of the drainage. You've had buildings that have had no setbacks. You've had other areas in Fiji where the entire infrastructure has not been built up to the standards. Why? Because of corruption. It's a fact. Because the rules weren't applied. So we are paying for that today. The cost of, for example, those developments are far more expensive today. So what do? We obviously cannot change the past. What we can do is, going into the future, we need to ensure it does not happen. So 20 years' time, nobody's standing up here again in Ngātaboa High School, hopefully in a bigger hall and air-conditioned, then they won't say that, oh look, they did this 20 years ago and we are paying for it today. So we need to be able to build our economy with a view to the future. And no economy is ever built just overnight. And to the point that was raised about the debt, I mean, I think it is frankly superfluous to say, Father Kevin Bai, with due respect, that because the economy is doing well, therefore we don't borrow. I mean, you don't get, if we want a road, we want to build your PCN squatter area, we need to be able to borrow money. There's $100 million is not lying around. The economy is doing well, the growth rates are there. The tourism sector only pays $2 million taxes every year because they've been given a 20-year tax holiday or 12-year tax holiday. They roll it over. You have your slip. These are some of the fundamental issues we need to address. So I will just go through some of the key areas, ladies and gentlemen, that is, I think, very important for us to be able to think about. 70% of our population is below the age of 40. Enormous challenges, but enormous opportunities. As somebody has said, that the youth is the firepower of any country. I think it was one of the presidents of India who wrote a lot more eloquently about it than I'm actually telling you. And if we are able to harness into that potential, we have a bright future ahead of us. and we need to obviously educate them and grow them. We have a huge housing problem. This is why government announced in the last budget announcement about offering incentives to the private sector, because if we simply rely on the public sector to provide the level of housing that we require, it will take a long period of time. We have to borrow money to do that. But if you get the private sector involved and you provide the right incentives and perhaps packages, then obviously they will invest and we are able to resolve our squatter problem a lot more quickly. Now, what is the rationale behind that? Apart from the moral and ethical argument about having people living dignified lives, as I said to somebody the other day when we were talking to some World Bank people, that when you go walk into a bank in Suva, some of the tellers who are serving in the bank actually live over a mangrove swamp in somewhere inner city Suva. Some of the people who are working in the civil service live as squatters. Just because somebody wears a shirt and tie and a coat and dresses up nicely does not mean they have a nice home. That is a reality, and that's what we need to solve. So that is very critical for us. From that point of human dignity, the second argument, of course, is that we need to increase the rate of home ownership because it increases savings in the country. Singapore has a home ownership rate of 93%. 93%. We are nowhere close to that. So we need to look at affordable housing. Affordable housing in the Fijian context, we always say low-cost housing. It has a number of connotations. In fact, just talking to the Housing Development Board in Singapore, they talk about, in fact, they do a lot of social engineering. In fact, massive amounts of social engineering. When they build apartments, and everybody lives in apartments, and you own the apartments, you get a strata title on the apartment. We changed the law 3 years ago, so now you can get strata titling on Crown land and Itauke land, which will mean the value of the Itauke land will increase, and I'll come back to that later. But the point is that by increasing home ownership, you are giving people a sense not just of dignity, but they actually own a property. As we've seen, mainstream banks in Fiji, ladies and gentlemen, are very conservative, extremely conservative. And we've had discussions just a few days ago with the Reserve Bank of Fiji's governor and the deputy governor and their team as to how we can make more money, cheaper money available for people who are going to build or buy their first homes, because the interest rate needs to be much lower. So if we are able to, for example, build, say, two-bedroom apartments at the cost of $50,000, $60,000, government is already contributing $10,000 if you're building your first home, $5,000 for buying your first home. And if we're able to provide that level of assistance and they're able to utilize some of the FNPF funds, suddenly the cost of them owning a 2 or 3 bedroom flat may be only $40,000. Payable over a period of 20 years, that's not a bad wicket to be on. They then, 3 years later, when they own that title, when they're living in that flat, when their grandmother passes away, their daughter's getting married, and they want to borrow $3,000 or $4,000, at the moment the banks are very reluctant in some of the areas of, personal loans without collateral. So they can then use that as collateral and be able to borrow the $3,000 or $4,000. They don't dip into the FNPF because that's their savings when they retire. And more so, they don't go to the money lenders. You'd be surprised how many people in Fiji go to money lenders. I've seen video footage. At 3 a.m. in the morning when the money hits the ATM accounts, you have 2 dudes getting off the car with this many ATM cards and books about this thick with all the PIN numbers. Because when you go to a money lender nowadays, you give them your ATM card. And you give them your PIN number. And then they withdraw the money every payday. This is why these people are queuing up in the banks. Because they're going to physically withdraw the money. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the reality. And that's what we are focused on. We are working with Father Kevin Barr's group, PCN, developing what is commonly known as Jittu Estate. There's obviously challenges. Some people don't want to move out of the situations, and Father Kevin Barr can also tell us about that. But there's a lot of logistics involved in that. But there's also a lot of opportunities in that we can harness, and that's what we are focused on. So that's number one issue, and I want to, I want people to be able to discuss these issues when you break out into your groups. The other one, of course, is the medical sector. And I'm highlighting some of these sort of social issues that we are very keen to address. If any one of us at the moment has a heart attack and we need cardiovascular surgery, open heart surgery is commonly called, nobody can do that in Fiji at the moment. We either go to Australia, New Zealand, or maybe India if you've got enough time. That is the reality. Majority of the people who withdraw their funds from FNPF do it for medical reasons also. That's the source of revenue, to go overseas and get that surgery. Kidney transplants, all of these sorts of things. None of it can be done in Fiji. We are focusing that. As you know, the Honourable Prime Minister recently was in India and he had discussions with the mainstream hospitals. Now, these are the areas of focus. Because if you have a healthy group of citizens who have access to full tertiary medical care, they'll become better contributors to the economy. In the same way as I've said to the business community, issues such as domestic violence, child sexual abuse, is not something for the NGOs only to talk about. It's not something that's relegated to the private sphere. It is a commercial issue too. Let me reiterate this. Majority of the people who work in the tourism industry, who clean your toilets, who serve on you when you go and have your breakfast in the morning, who change your bed sheets, are women. And majority of the people who are victims of domestic violence are women. So if they're being bashed up the night before at home, or have only 2 hours worth of sleep, what do you think the level of contribution would be the next morning at work? I mean, if I were bashed up the night before at home too, or some guy bashed me up in the street, I won't be able to stand up here and give my full 100% to you. So why do we expect these women to give the 100% if they're being bashed up the night before at home? It has a huge commercial impact, a productivity issue. That's what it is. So it becomes everybody's business. And one of the things that we try and do through these forums is we found generally people tend to be very parochial. You are leaders of your own organizations, you're leaders in your own community. Please do not be so parochial. We want you to be able to focus on the wider aspect. No country has become great, economic well-being has not improved simply because people have just focused in the narrow areas. Yes, you have areas of expertise, but you're not able to think about the greater nation's well-being. We've had, of course, I'd like to very briefly touch upon the public service reforms. As you know that we are going through a number of changes. There's a number of ministries that are currently being reviewed. A couple of them already have been reviewed. The reports will be coming out soon. A couple of them needs to be overhauled almost completely. Some of them, the sizes need to be readjusted. Perhaps some of the their work needs to be better placed with other ministries. But the whole purpose of it is to have better service delivery and to be able to have a streamlined process. We've talked about the manufacturing sector. We think there's an enormous potential in the manufacturing sector. As the Deputy Governor highlighted, when you look at the overall statistics for manufacturing, it is seen to decline because of the sugar production. But it does not necessarily mean that manufacturing in other areas of the manufacturing sector have decreased also. In fact, there is a growth. In fact, in some of those areas, we've seen a lot more people investing in the factories that are being built. We see enormous potential for Fiji. And that's why it is very critical from government's perspective to ensure we get the right infrastructure. We are currently toying around with some ideas in terms of improving our current account deficit. And how do we do that? The way to do that is to be able to target areas, the businesses in Australia and New Zealand, for example, that have the appetite to come into countries like Fiji. But from government's perspective, obviously, we need to have a better regulatory framework. From your perspective also, we need to be able to work together to provide the right environment to be able to entice those businesses into Fiji. It is also very critical that all facets of the economy, including trade unions, employer organizations, employee organizations, understand the reality that we need to get our pricings right. If the pricing is not right, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not just only talking about labor costs, I'm talking about costs across the board. If the pricing is not right, you do not become an attractive destination. In the same way we have said previously, if the tourism sector, notwithstanding the various incentives that have been given, if they charge $20 for a bowl of fries in a hotel, your pricing is not right. Now, people in fact don't mind paying a higher cost for the room. But what they have a problem with, because they have to eat 3 times a day, they don't want to pay $100 every time 2 people eat. That is a critical issue. I mean, I have received the submission, Michael is here, I received the submission from the tourism sector, and they're saying our departure tax is very high, etc. But the point is, they're only paying $2 million in taxes. The point is, though, we need to be able to understand how to position ourselves. We have now, Fiji Airways now connects, as we've said previously, to every single continent that rims the Pacific Ocean except South America. We fly to LA, we're going to fly to San Francisco next month, we fly to Hong Kong, we fly to Singapore, we do Australia, New Zealand, we do the rest of the Pacific. Korean Airways flies to North Asia. So we are very well connected. We need to take advantage of it. Please take the direct flight to Singapore because we need the flight to be successful, the route to be successful. If we are able to increase the frequency of that flight, of that route, you'll get a lot more people coming in. We can tap into the Indian market, we can tap into the market beyond that too. And the Indians will be the largest outbound market in about 5 to 7 years' time. These are the things that we're doing. As we've said, and let me reiterate this, why are we doing the 4-laning road out of the airport? Why is AFL refurbishing Nandi Airport? You want the guy who jumps on the plane in Australia at 6:30 in the morning to be drinking his pina colada at Sheraton by 12:30. We want to make it easier. We want them to come through Nandi Airport, say, what a great airport, all the facilities are here, the people at the board are friendly, doesn't mean we compromise on security. I can get out of the airport on a 4-lane road and be in the hotel, within a few minutes. That is the point of difference. That is the competition that we are also facing. The cost of food in Bali is a lot more inexpensive than Fiji, even though it's 7 hours longer. That makes a difference. If you've got a family of 4 or 5, and you've got 5 or 6 raving kids with very healthy appetites, where do you think you're going to go? These are the kind of considerations we want people to think about. Now, the manufacturing sector, ladies and gentlemen, has enormous potential for us, and we're hoping that there'll be some more inputs in that. We've had some exciting news about some other areas. The construction industry, of course, we are glad to partner with the Fiji Institution of Engineers. I hope they change their name rather than calling themselves an institution. Fiji Institute of Engineers is probably a better word. But we've partnered with them. They have done the scoping works. FOC for the government, over about 250 buildings or sites, 250 sites. Of course there'll be work generated from it for them and others. But the point is, it was done efficiently. It was done professionally. The Adopt a School program, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you, with the Prime Minister who's pushing it, in all the international forums, people are completely taken aback. I don't know how many have actually been to this website. If you go and click on this website, you'll be able to get the location of the school on the map of Fiji. You then click another hyperlink. It will give you the actual entire engineer's assessment report, building by building. The plans, the sketches, the photographs, the entire thing is there. Never been done before. Now what that does is conjures up a lot of confidence in the entire process. This is why people feel comfortable. There's of course a bank account detail there too. But it will also give them an update on the construction of it once it gets constructed. So you see, by doing something properly, by doing something in a transparent manner, you get a lot more traction internationally. You get a lot more traction even locally, and people feel confident in the system. And that's what we're trying to do. Many of our laws, ladies and gentlemen, are very archaic. You would have seen in the last session of Parliament, we pushed about 14 bills. Not pushed, we tabled 14 bills. shouldn't use the word push, we tabled 14 bills. Now all of them are before the committees. The reason why we need to do these bills and why we're doing it expeditiously is because our laws need to catch up with the changing technology. Our laws need to catch up with the changing environment. And when your laws are relevant, then of course people feel confident in the system. And that's what we're doing. And we look forward to working with professional organizations like even the Fiji Architects of Engineers. There's obviously a need for a lot of skill sets, and perhaps this is why Pratap had asked the question about, in which areas has there been a job growth. There are a lot of areas in which we require a lot more skilled people. And this is why we've now set up 13 technical colleges throughout Fiji. Never been done before. We're working with many of the organizations, the educational organizations, where entire schools that had low numbers are now converted fully into technical colleges. And some of the one-month courses are offered for free because it gives people a sense of livelihood and source of livelihood. If you look in the Fiji Sun, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, when they had the first graduates that came out, a lot of these youths were unemployed. Some of them finished school at Form 4. Some of them had been without any employment for 2 or 3 years. But now they actually have jobs because they've learned how to lay tiles. Maybe not as highly professionally as people who've been within the system for 10 years, but this is a start. They're gaining gainful employment. And talking about employment also, I think the Deputy Governor had highlighted that now they look at employment rates vis-a-vis the FNPF. But there are many people who are outside the formal sector also. So that is not necessarily a good indication as to how many people are having what we call gainful employment. A lot of people I speak to, they earn about $200 a week by selling various vegetables, coconuts, produce from their farms in the villages on a regular basis. Some of them earn about, depending on a good day, earn about $150 by just selling boo. So we need to be able to tap into those areas. This is why we've taken this initiative, the microfinance grant that the Ministry of Industry and Trade is giving, the $1,000 grant. But we have also agreed, and this is probably letting you in terms of what we want to do in the future, we also had a discussion with the RBF that we need to have an overarching regulatory framework for small to medium enterprises. At the moment, NextNet is doing things, we have RBF doing things, we have Industry and Trade doing things, we have other ministries, Rural and Maritime Development doing things. What we want to do is consolidate that. And the Malaysians actually have a very good model, and recently the Deputy Governor was in Malaysia, and we hope to piggyback on those types of frameworks that they have to be able to provide a focused attention on small to medium enterprise development. That also includes not just financing, but having business incubators and having one particular line of assistance. And they can, of course, then tap into Fiji Development Bank. We at the moment have Asian Development Bank experts looking at the FDB itself. Development banks, of course, ladies and gentlemen, was the in thing in the 50s and 60s and 70s. We now need to see whether the FDB needs to be focused on other areas, or whether in terms of its portfolio, what should be the focus. We have also recognized, and I think it was 2 consultations ago, where we talked about the lack of venture capital finance in Fiji. There's a huge need for that. And unfortunately, FDB in some of the projects had to fill in that gap, when really it is not FDB's place to do so. Traditionally, the banks are very conservative, so we need to have another vehicle to actually help finance greenfield projects, high-risk projects that could do well. And this is one of the areas that we again want to develop in respect of that. Ladies and gentlemen, overall, the other issue that we have also done in terms of trying to mainstream is climate change. Again, this is, please don't think, and I know a lot of people in the commercial sector think climate change is one of those, NGO type issues. It actually has a huge impact on our environment. It has a huge impact on the way that we do business. We've already now relocated 3 villages. There's about another 64 villages that needs to be relocated. So the way that we are looking at the relocation is not just simply to relocate them, but also to find a form of sustained livelihoods for them. Because when you relocate people from a particular area, they've been there for a while, what would be the source of livelihood? Do we tie it up? Do we tie it up? With fish ponds? Or do we have crab farming? These are the sort of overall aspects that we are looking at. Climate change, of course, has an impact on tourism. It has an impact on civil service delivery. It has an impact on agriculture, on fisheries and forest. I think about a month ago, because of a sudden rise in temperature in the waters around the Coral Coast, a lot of fish had washed up to the shore dead. Unheard of. But that's a reality the Permanent Secretary of Fisheries needs to deal with. This is why climate change now has been brought in within national planning, because it's through national planning that we're able to tap into all the other ministries to be able to have a national approach to the issues of climate change. We need to look at, for example, going beyond Australia and New Zealand in terms of our requirements. For example, generally the seeds that we've used in Fiji have been sourced from New Zealand for tomatoes. But it's a different climatic setting. Now the seeds that may be more appropriate would be from countries in Southeast Asia or Southern Asia. In India they grow tomatoes 8 or 9 months around the year. In Fiji we only do it for a few months because of the variety of the seeds that we use. So these are the overall issues that we are looking at. We're trying to get the mainstream ministries to deal with, and of course your input would be very, very important. We have seen a rise in motor vehicle numbers in Fiji. Those of you who live in Suva would know now we actually get traffic jams, real traffic jams. And that's of course because of the increase in ownership of vehicles. And a lot of it, many can attribute to the fact the reduction of tariffs for motor vehicles, and of course the increase in living standards. I completely agree with those people who talk about that growth is not the only indicator of how well a country is doing, but more importantly, is not the only indicator to see how everybody is doing in the country. What is really a good measurement of ensuring how well everybody in the country is doing, and we do not have this trickle-down approach, which is the traditional approach of multilateral development banks, is the gap between the rich and the poor, the inequality index, the Gini coefficient, I think that's what it's called, the Gini. We need to look at the Gini, G-I-N-I, not the other Gini. We need to look at the Gini, and the Gini for Fiji has in fact decreased. So in other words, inequality in Fiji, ladies and gentlemen, has decreased if you compare us to about 10 years ago, which is very good news. And that is really one of the objectives that we do have. We need to continuously have an eye on the inequality measurement. In countries like Australia, New Zealand, India even, China, various other countries in recent times, with a recent study that has come out, I'm quite happy to share that with you, inequality, notwithstanding the fact that there's been growth in those countries, inequality has increased. There's only about 4 countries where inequality actually has decreased in the Asia-Pacific region, and Fiji is one of them. The other one I know from memory is Malaysia. I cannot remember the other 2, but I've got soft copies of that study, and Father Kevin Ba, I'd like you to have a look at that. So these are the areas that we need to be focused on. And, for example, focused attention to, for example, targeted assistance for housing, electricity, water, education is very, very critical to reducing the inequality gap between the haves and the have-nots. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if you think about it overall, if you bring more people from the periphery to the center, you will get better productivity. If you bring more people from the periphery to the center, you will get a greater sense of working together as a nation. And that is very, very important. We have also, I'd like to very quickly talk about Itauke land development. Yesterday we commissioned 4 sites that government is going to fund to develop. There's one in Warumbitia. There's about 16 lots from memory. There is one in Seweni. It's about 33 lots. There's one in Vunda. That's about, I think, 11 lots from memory. And there's one in Yandua, which is also about 13 lots. Now, one of the issues that we've obviously faced, a lot of people say that the Itaukei people are asset rich but cash poor. And that really is a reality in many instances. Vast amount of asset, but inability to have that generated as revenue, as good revenue for them, and a constant stream of revenue. Now, one of the reasons why that has been the inability of them to be able to access capital or a loan to develop those lands for their own benefit, for them to be able to lease out. Traditionally what has been is that you have a huge acreage of land, this much of land, so some developer comes along and he takes a development lease, or she takes a development lease, and then they do the subdivision, then they sell off the lots, or lease out the lots at a premium. So the landowners are actually left with a basic lease. What we want to do there, obviously, is have them develop it themselves with some assistance, so they themselves are at the end of the value-added chain. It also means that it brings more land into productive use that is lying idle. It also means that they will get to see the value of leasing out those lands. So more land will become available. And at the end of the day, whether you want to build your house, whether you want to build your hotel, whether you want to build a commercial property, whether you want to build a factory, you need the access to the land. That's what you're concerned about. So this is a very exciting project for government, and we are glad that these 4 have been commissioned. We hope to do another one next week in Suva. It is being done extremely professionally. It's been given out to the private sector to carry out the works, and we hope that a couple of them will actually be available for sale within 1 year's time. And we hope that a lot more will come on stream. So these are the type of potentials that we are unlocking. The question by the CEO of FDB, one of the issues about agriculture has been, ladies and gentlemen, is because of the short-term leases that were given out for agricultural purposes. This is why you never saw mainstream banks participate using agricultural leases as collateral. ANZ and Westpac lend very gladly to tourism developers. They have 99-year leases, even though it's Crown land or Itaukei land, it's a 99-year lease. But because for agriculture you don't get a 99-year lease or a longer term lease, more than at least 30 years, this is why FDB is left to pick up the pieces. This is why you only have crop liens. I think BSP used to have crop liens because of a legacy issue, because National Bank of Fiji used to give out crop liens. But FDB carries the bulk of it. So by having longer term leases, you're actually building confidence, and we're hoping that ultimately, in a couple of years' time, the mainstream banks will also participate. There's a number of other areas that we do want to address, and we need to have your thoughts on it. For example, insurance companies, we believe, are getting scot-free in Fiji. Insurance companies in Fiji, for example, have refused to provide insurance cover to people living in Nadi and Ba, to ordinary citizens. They only give it to the big companies because they see it as a high-risk area. In some countries that would be illegal. You cannot cherry-pick. Nor have they come forward and said, okay, you have a cyclone issue, why don't we offer, for example, a maximum of $5,000 insurance for roofing for basic homes if you do this type of strapping. And we can limit your claim to even $3,000 or $5,000. Government would not have to spend the type of money that we've already done. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that we have now put in $80 million through the Help for Homes initiative. This money, ladies and gentlemen, that allocation is unprecedented, firstly. The manner in which it has been done is also unprecedented. We partnered with the private sector. And a direct assistance. There is absolutely no legal obligation for the government to do so. But we also recognize the fact that most of the people who aren't able to build those homes or rebuild those homes come from very low socioeconomic backgrounds, and we are helping them to build their lives together. But what we want, as has been the condition of it, they all get a drawing as to how to strap their roofs. So what we need is the insurance companies to now come and participate in that particular project. Unfortunately, they're not doing so. So we as government need to think about as to how we can make them do so. In the same way, we have the fair reporting of credit. And I know there's been a lot of comments, very positive comments by ordinary Fijians. As been highlighted by the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, There are people who are low-income people or middle-income people who want to have a better home, who want to buy that television set, who want to be able to do the extension to their home. But if the regime pertaining to reporting of credit and credit history is not done in a transparent and a regulated manner, then you will deprive the people at the lower end of the socio-economic scale from accessing that credit. That is the reality. And that's what we have done for the reporting of credit through the new regulatory framework that came into effect on Friday, just yesterday. Now we'll have institutions or agencies that can carry that out in a regulated format. We have also, ladies and gentlemen, want to very briefly talk to you about the state-owned enterprise reforms. As you know, we've had a successful divestment of our shares in Fiji Ports Corporation Limited with FNPF, the Fijian government and Aitken Spence. One of the issues, for example, that we like to highlight is by getting the right partners. We are not divesting shares for the sake of divestment. We do not see it as a revenue source per se. We are trying to reform these organizations to get the best value for the country. When the Fiji Ports Terminal Limited went into a private management, the port turnaround time improved in excess of 30%. Shipping companies used to charge a levy for bringing containers into Fiji and taking containers out of Fiji because our ports were too inefficient. The waiting time was too long. It cost them money to run their boats, the fuel, the cost of the personnel. Now those levies are gone. So those levies, the reduction or the removal of those levies needs to be passed on to the consumer. So this is why we're choosing strategically, in the same way at the moment we're looking at Fiji Electricity Authority. And we see the Fiji Electricity Authority as a very good vehicle to also include the development of the capital markets. The capital markets, ladies and gentlemen, can also be developed when we get ordinary mums and dads participating as shareholders in institutions like or agencies like Fiji Electricity Authority. Very quickly, in terms of education, we have, as you know, increased funding for education quite significantly. The number of teachers that are now within the service has improved. We also are looking at, obviously, a huge rebuild. And in fact, if you look at the rebuild cost, the World Bank assessment, World Bank EU assessment, what is called the PDNA report, post-disaster assessment report, estimates that about $1.4 billion US dollars worth of damage has been caused to the Fijian economy, which also includes the huge rebuild effort. If we were to go tomorrow and build every single school, we obviously have to borrow a lot of money, which obviously is unsustainable all at once. We also, of course, have to have the capacity to do so. You know, you can't create engineers overnight and create construction companies overnight. They need to have the capacity to do so. So there will be a huge rebuild effort. But overall, in terms of the operational cost of the education sector, we've been talking to, of course, the various universities, including the Fiji National University. We had a meeting with the University of Fiji also a couple of days ago to see how we can also rationalize the courses that are available. We need to have our tertiary institutions that actually help in nation building too. So they need to give priority to areas in which we need skill sets in. And that's what tertiary institutions also need to contribute to. Lastly, I'd just like to talk very quickly about finances per se for government. As we've said and has been highlighted by the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji, the debt to GDP ratio has decreased quite dramatically. In the early 2000 period, the debt to GDP ratio is something like 53 to 59%. Debt to GDP ratio, our target was about 46%. At the moment it's a bit lower because of the underutilization, but we're looking at about 46%. Now that by comparison to most of the countries is very, very good. When as was highlighted, the USA and Japan have a debt to GDP ratio about 200%. Japan, I think. USA is 100%. But of course they're not necessarily our benchmarks. but other countries, of course, have a very much higher debt to GDP ratio. The good thing is, as we've said before, when you go out to borrow money as an individual, you don't go to the bank to borrow money to go and eat at McDonald's. You borrow money from the bank to go and do the renovation to your house, or build a new house, or build a new fence, or maybe buy a car, because that's an asset which you can use for a period of time. Now, what used to happen previously is that the capital and operational mix of government's budget was extremely skewed. So whatever money was allocated in a year, 85% of that used to go towards operational costs. Only 15% used to go into capital investment. Now the mix is about 60-40, 70-30, which is actually a very good benchmark. And that's what we want to continue. We cannot build homes for squatters. We cannot build better roads. We cannot build better schools if we do not invest in these assets. And the way to invest in these assets is to have a very regimented manner in accessing those funds. Now, I can tell you the World Bank and ADB loans, World Bank loan, the interest rate is LIBOR, which is generally about 0.7, 0.9%, plus 1.3. So you're looking at an overall interest rate of 2%. The Chinese loans, let's not blow this out of proportion. The Chinese loans were specifically borrowed for the roadings that we see today. The road up Sawani area, the road up Singatoka Valley, the road up connecting to Nambawala to Draketi. Please go and talk to those people and see how their lives have improved. Please go and talk to those farmers that live up agriculture at the Singatoka Valley, where we call it the fruit and vegetable cradle or basket of Fiji, how they used to bring their tomatoes. They used to bump along the potholes for 10 kilometers before it reached Singatoka market or any other market, and the lifespan of that tomato was reduced significantly. Now, those crops now are reaching those markets in a lot better form. So the lifespan of those crops have improved significantly. The quality of lives of those people have improved significantly. They are now connected to the rest of the world, the rest of Fiji, I should say. In the same way, if you see the deregulation of the telecommunications industry, it has meant that at peak time, the telephone rate in Vodafone, when there was no competition, was about 99 cents a unit, only a few years ago. Today, peak calls about 23 cents a unit. You don't have 5 ups and 7 ups. You didn't have that about 8 years ago. You now have that. So the cost of those businesses are being reduced. The quality of people's lives are being improved. Completely agree if the money is being borrowed and is being thrown down the toilet. It's not being utilized properly. But if the money is being borrowed for capital investment and it's targeted well with an overall strategy that will help you position the country better, will help you position an industry better, then obviously it's money worth spent. The reality though is, ladies and gentlemen, as we are seeing now, is your assets always need to be maintained. And we have seen a huge neglect of that. Roads were built, but you need to reseal them every few years. Schools and building health centers were built, but it is never painted. You see, go to some of these squalor conditions in some of the civil servants used to live in rural schools and rural health centers. They were terrible. We have a huge focus in making sure that those living quarters, the standards that they have to adhere to is much higher. So as a country, if we want to be successful, we need to understand the fact that once you build an asset, you need to look after it. You need to regularly maintain it. In the same way you buy your car, you polish it every month, or maybe even sooner, every 2 weeks. You paint your house on a regular basis. The same approach needs to be taken to government assets, public assets. And that's the focus that you'll see, ladies and gentlemen, in the next few years. I would like to thank you very much for your attendance here. I know some of the Suva people have made an effort to come to the West. I'd like to thank you for that. You're also contributing to the Lautoka's economy. Richard, you're getting STT and VAT being paid, and people are occupying your hotels, and hopefully they'll do some shopping too. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for coming here. We would like to, of course, get as much input from you as possible. As you know that we changed the format rather than individuals standing up and sort of speaking for umpteen number of minutes. We want to put you in the groups so you have a focused attention. Please do not hesitate to move to different groups also to contribute. Don't think you just can only contribute to one group. And we'd like you to give us as many ideas as possible which we can take on board. We want to be able to, obviously, your ideas, we would like them to be a long-term goal also. As we have said to, for example, recently we had the submissions and the budget consultations of the respective ministries. So a lot of the ministries, for example, would come in year out and year in and say, look, we want to paint this building and we want to do X, Y, Z. The following year they'll come and say about something else. What we've asked them to do now is to give us a 5-year plan. You say they have this many buildings, for example, a simple example. This many buildings, say, for example, the police, they have a number of police quarters. So we have a plan for them. We may be able to access cheaper finance offshore. We may be able to get a donor agency to even contribute to that. But the whole plan is to actually have a plan and know exactly what we want to do. So if the PS for Fisheries and Forests knows exactly that he needs to build 10 ice plants, we obviously can't do all 10 at once, but some of them may come on stream in 3 years' time because there's a population movement. We need to have a plan. So we don't actually have to haggle every year in, year out. And that way we can also put it out to the donor agencies and you'll find a lot more confidence building in that way. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this morning. We look forward to your contributions. We also are providing you with lunch, which is of course bought from a local outlet, Richard. We're contributing to the local economy. And please stay around and please also mingle with each other. We'll have the teams going around from Ministry of Finance and also talking to you. So Vinaka, and have a good day. Thanks.